Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Midnight News, broadcasting to you live from Algiers. And here are tonight's headlines. Gaza's health ministry reports a death toll of more than 34,000 and over 78,000 injuries since October 7 amid ongoing Zionist aggression, while 2 Palestinians were martyred in Rafah as a result of the occupation bombing. Next, U.S. lawmakers threaten ICC with sanctions over potential Israeli arrest warrants. And the Algerian president, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, visits defense ministry and emphasizes sovereignty and rejects debt in address to army officers and personnel. Welcome back to the program. At the outset, the Palestinian Ministry of Health in the Gaza Strip said on Wednesday that the death toll from the Zionist war in the Gaza Strip since October 7 had risen to 34,844 martyrs and more than 78,404 injured. This comes as the same source reported that the occupation forces committed 7 massacres during the past 24 hours, in which 55 were killed, 200 others wounded, arrived at hospitals during the aggression. The Zionist aggression continues against the city of Rafah, south of the Gaza Strip, as local sources reported that 2 Palestinians were martyred and others injured in an occupation bombing that targeted a motorcycle near the Salah ad-Din gate south of the city. An Israeli airstrike also targeted the vicinity of the destroyed Gaza airport, and violent artillery shelling continued on the Al Salam neighborhood east of the city of Rafah. The same sources revealed that a number of Palestinians were also injured in the shelling from the occupation march that targeted them west of the city. Health personnel at Abu Yusuf al-Najjar Hospital in Rafah announced that the hospital is out of service after it was stormed by the Israeli occupation forces. Health officials pointed out that about 200 patients in the hospital were forced to evacuate from the west of the city after receiving calls from the occupation urging them to leave. The Director General of Hospitals in the Gaza Strip, Dr. Mohammed Zakout, confirmed that the Strip is now without hospitals after Abu Yusuf al-Najjar Hospital went out of service. And Doctors Without Borders (MSF) warned of the dire consequences resulting from the attack on Rafah. According to MSF, the assault is poised to have catastrophic effects on more than 1 million people. In a statement issued on Wednesday, the organization confirmed that the attack will exacerbate the damage to the health system. MSF also noted that reaching some hospitals that are vulnerable to destruction would become impossible. Moreover, they revealed that it had started evacuating ambulatory patients from the Indonesian field hospital in the city. And the Euromed Human Rights Monitor said that a serious multi-dimensional humanitarian catastrophe has started worsening rapidly in Rafah, 2 days after the beginning of the Israeli occupation army's orders to forcibly displace residents and a ground incursion and control of the Rafah crossing. In a statement released on Wednesday, the monitor stressed that blocking humanitarian aid trucks and fuel from entering through the Rafah and Karam Abu Salim crossings could swiftly worsen the looming threat of famine, endangering all Gaza Strip residents and intensifying the ongoing humanitarian crisis in the region for the months to come. Palestinian factions rejected any attempt to impose external guardianship over the Rafah crossings or any other border entry point. They denounced such measures as a form of occupation and vowed to resist them with the same determination as they opposed the Israeli occupation. The factions issued a statement through their follow-up committee in response to reports suggesting an American security company's involvement in managing the Rafah crossing. They called upon all parties to reject any cooperation with such plans, emphasizing that internal affairs should be solely under Palestinian jurisdiction and consensus. Commissioner General of the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini, said, I quote, "Key crossing points continue to be closed. They need to be reopened without any delay," end of quote. For his part, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on the occupation to reopen the Rafah and Karam Abu Salim crossings immediately. And about the incursion of Rafah, the AU Commission chairperson Moussa Faki Mohammed firmly condemned the Zionist entity for its invasion. He said it has resulted in continued loss of life and widespread devastation for civilians. In the same context, Qatar condemned in the strongest terms the Zionist bombardment of the Rafah governorate and invasion of the land crossing, as well as the threat to displace citizens from housing centers. Doha called for an urgent international action to prevent the invasion of the city, the commitment of a genocide, and a full protection for civilians in accordance with international law and international humanitarian law. The Russian Foreign Ministry has urged Israel to uphold international humanitarian law following its incursion into Rafah. Speaking at a briefing, spokeswoman Maria Zakharova emphasized Russia's stance, highlighting the need for strict adherence to international legal provisions in the region and the potential consequences of the incident on civilian lives.
Another destabilizing factor including the entire region was the start of the Israeli military ground operation in Rafah, in the south of Gaza. There are around 1.5 million Palestinian civilians there. In this regard, we demand strict compliance with the provisions of international humanitarian law.
At the request of Algeria, the UN Security Council held on Tuesday evening a closed consultation session to discuss the mass graves that were discovered in the Gaza Strip. This meeting comes after the discovery of mass graves in Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip. Diplomatic sources said the meeting was an opportunity to discuss in detail these blatant violations by the Zionist occupier. The permanent representative of Algeria to the UN, Ambassador Ammar Ben Jama, pointed out that the Zionist aggression against the Gaza Strip has exceeded all limits and is not subject to any rules. The scope of student protests against the war in Gaza expanded in many European and U.S. universities. This comes as the U.S. authorities began dismantling a pro-Palestine camp at the University of Chicago and arrested dozens of students before releasing them later. Nabil Khazini.
Up to this moment, there is no indication that the students' protest movement in U.S. universities is about to end. Despite the dismantling of sitting camps in a number of universities and clashes in some others, students across the United States are still faithful to their cause. Over the past 2 weeks, The United States has witnessed pro-Palestinian demonstrations at more than 150 colleges and universities. One of those protests that made the headlines were the ones of Chicago University, where police shut down a pro-Palestinian encampment. The university said it will proceed with disciplinary action. This raises more questions about the state of freedom of speech in the US, as reports suggest that since last month, over 2,600 people have been arrested on 50 campuses.
The same solidarity with the people of Gaza unites the peaceful protesters who have camped here on the Quad for the last 7 days. These are non-violent protesters and they are our students. We call on President Alivisatos to find an alternative to police violence and to continue negotiating.
The scope of student protests against the war in Gaza is still expanding around the world. This is one of Britain's most prestigious universities. At the 19th century Oxford University, students demand an end to the massacres in Gaza.
It's one thing to put out a statement and acknowledge the very bare minimum that this is a humanitarian crisis. There are people starving, children starving. All of the 600,000 children in Rafah right now are all malnourished and starving. This is a UNICEF statistic. And I think it's the bare minimum to acknowledge that.
On Wednesday, a US Republican congressman presented a bill aimed at deporting international students who were arrested during pro-Palestinian protests. Despite this and many other restrictions, students in the US and across the world seem determined to support Palestine till the end.
Republican senators in the U.S. have warned the International Criminal Court's prosecutor of potential sanctions if the court continues to issue arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. More details with Hussein Berkan.
The threatening tone from U.S. congressional representatives toward ICC officials has escalated, particularly if they pursue Israeli arrests. This message, seen as a direct challenge to the ICC's independence, has raised concerns and even drew insults towards the respectful international judicial body. Observers note this move as a clear indication of the U.S. unwavering support for Israel, despite mounting evidence of its actions and crimes.
If such decisions are made, we warn you that sanctions will be imposed on your employees and partners, and you and your family will be banned from entering the United States. You have been warned.
The statement issued by congressional representatives was laden with dissatisfaction and disparagements toward one of the most prominent independent international judicial bodies. Analysts highlight a move that clearly unsettles the United States, prompting swift expression of support for the entity in all its forms, an entity Washington vehemently shields from scrutiny for its actions and defenses. Historical evidence abounds. To safeguard Israel occupation officials from potential repercussions, lawmakers notify the ICC prosecutor of impending legislative measures described as precautionary. These measures would entail imposing sanctions on the court should it issue international arrest warrants against those implicated in the Gaza Strip genocide, a prospect lawmakers warn could strain relations irreparable, relations that hinge on a decision that may bring the architect of the genocide, Benjamin Netanyahu, and his associate to face legal proceedings.
Republican members of the House are preparing precautionary legislation to impose sanctions on International Criminal Court officials if they issue orders to arrest Israeli officials.
The bloodshed and displacement inflicted by the ruthless Israeli occupation, resulting in the deaths and displacement of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza since October 7, has instilled fear of potential condemnation from the International Criminal Court. This apprehension amplifies, particularly in the wake of recent rulings from the International Court of Justice urging immediate action from the occupation to halt further acts of genocide in the region.
on to different developments. The President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces and Minister of National Defense, paid a visit on Wednesday to the headquarters of the Ministry of National Defense, where he met with executives and employees of the People's National Army and delivered a speech via video conference. The Algerian president met with officers and employees of the army, where he delivered a speech via video conference broadcast to all the command forces, the 6 military districts or regions, major units, and higher schools across the entire national territory. A statement by the Algerian Defense Ministry said that the president stressed in his speech that national sovereignty is preserved by relying on a strong, imposing army and a developed economy, reiterating his rejection of external debt, as it is one of the factors that jeopardizes the independence of the state's sovereign decision.
لازم نصون الاستقلال تاعنا. الاستقلال سبق لي قلتها نصونوه بأمرين: جيش قوي واقتصاد قوي. قد ما نقوي الجيش والهيبة نتاعو قد ما نقص من الأطماع نتاع الجهة الفلانية ولا الجهة الفلانية والجهة الفلانية. ماهوش جيش اللي قوي باش يعتدي. التاريخ يشهد للجزائر المستقلة من مارس 1962 إلى يومنا هذا، عمر الجزائر ما خرجت من الشرعية الدولية. عمر الجزائر ما تعدات على واحد، تعداوا علينا وهجموا علينا، ولكن احنا لا، ندافع على ترابنا فقط. إذن نقوي الجيش، وتقوية الجيش ماهيش باش نسيطر على منطقة ولا نسيطر على جيران ولا لا، باش نحمي أرضي اللي ضحاوا عليها قوافل تلو القوافل تاع الشهداء. هذا ما كان باش الجيل الحالي يعيش حر.
The Algerian Defense Ministry statement also said that the President of the Republic emphasized during his speech that the establishment of the National Day of Memory reflects the pride of the Algerian people towards their honorable and glorious history. Let's take a listen.
أسست اليوم الوطني للذاكرة، وهذا اليوم الذي هو 8 ماي لما نتكلم عن الذاكرة نتاعنا كثير اللي يلوموا علينا. الشعب اللي ما عندوش جذور، الشعب اللي ما عندوش سلف صالح مجاهد، مصيره مجهول. هذاك علاش احنا نفتخر جدودنا، نفتخر بمقاومة دامت 70 سنة. 70 سنة كل مناطق الجزائر ثارت واحدة تلو الأخرى. شعب مقاوم، شعب رافض الاحتلال، شعب رافض أن تمس حريته.
President of the Republic Abdelmajid Tebboune welcomed Isidore Mvuba, Speaker of the National Assembly of the Republic of Congo, on an official visit to Algeria. The meeting held in Algiers on Wednesday marked an important diplomatic exchange between the two countries. According to a statement from the Algerian presidency, the meeting was attended by the President of the National People's Assembly, Ibrahim Boughali, and the Director of the Presidential Office, Boualam Boualam.
Mais on vient de de vivre un moment
We have experienced historic moments as we listen to the voice of wisdom in a time when wisdom has become a rare currency. Regarding all bilateral issues, as everyone knows, cooperation relations between Algeria and Congo are historic relations dating back to 1964, and they witnessed significant momentum with the return of the President Denis Sassou Nguesso to power. There is complete consensus between the Algerian and Congolese presidents. Regarding parliamentary cooperation, the president congratulated us on reaching the signing of a framework agreement and expressed hope that cooperation between the two parliamentary chambers will be enhanced to the highest levels in the near future. President Sassou Nguesso is awaiting the holding of the Joint Commission to revive some files, and he regrets that the agreements concluded during his visit to Algeria in 2017 were not implemented. We are awaiting the holding of the Joint Commission to revive these agreements. We are very happy and pleased and extremely delighted to meet such a unique personality as Mr. President.
On May 8, 1945, Algeria celebrates its National Memory Day, commemorating the 79th anniversary of the massacres committed by the then colonial France against Algerians. On the occasion, Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune underlined once again his unwavering commitment towards the memory file. Marwa Blaiwar has more details.
The bad memory of French occupation's atrocities lingers in the Algerian mind, intensified by the brutal massacres of May 8, 1945, that left thousands of martyrs in the eastern cities of Sétif, Guelma, and Kharrata. A date that marks a sad chapter in Algerian history, characterized by the savage massacres orchestrated by colonial France. As the French commemorated the Allied victory over Nazi Germany and the end of World War II, tens of thousands of Algerians peacefully rallied in several cities, echoing their call for the independence pledged by France. Nevertheless, the French occupation responded with betrayal, criminalization, and extermination of the demonstrators, indiscriminately killing around 45,000 martyrs in mass executions. They disposed of the victims' bodies in lime kilns and threw them into valleys using trucks. The French authorities believed that by inflicting such barbarism upon the Algerians, they could kill the liberation struggle, ignoring that these massacres would serve as the catalyst for armed resistance, sparking the liberation revolution 9 years later. Algeria commemorates with profound pride and reverence the struggles and sacrifices of its people, serving as a steadfast source of inspiration for all Algerians. President Abdelmajid Tebboune's commitment to safeguarding Algerian memory was underscored in his message on the occasion of the 79th anniversary of the May 8th massacres, emphasizing that the memory file remains inalienable and imprescriptible. This sentiment is reflected by the Joint Committee of Historians from Algeria and France, whose mission encompasses a comprehensive review and resolute of various issues, including the recovery of archives, property, the repatriation of the remains of resistance fighters, and the skulls, in addition to addressing the consequences of nuclear tests and the investigation into missing people. This reflects Algeria's earnest pursuit of an objective, bold, and impartial reckoning with historical truth, a commitment emphasized by the Algerian president in his message.
Moving on to economy now. 10 cooperation agreements concerning various economic and commercial fields have been signed between Algeria and Mauritania in Nouakchott as part of the 6th Algerian Products Fair, as stated by the Ministry of Trade and Export Promotion. The fair ended with the signing of 2 new cooperation agreements between Algerian and Mauritanian economic operators, bringing the total number of agreements to 10. And the 12th meeting of the Algerian-Turkish Joint Governmental Committee for Economic, Scientific and Technical Cooperation took place in Ankara, Turkey, and was led by Algerian Minister of Energy Muhammad Arqab and Turkish Minister of Family and Social Services Mahinur Özdemir Gotak. or Goktas. A statement by the Algerian Ministry of Energy highlighted the session's focus on assessing the advancements in economic and trade relations achieved over the past 3 years, urging for their reinforcement and diversification to meet the shared goal outlined by the presidents of both nations, which is reaching $10 billion in trade exchanges in the foreseeable future. That was it for tonight's news program. Thank you for tuning in and have a good night.